Imagine the Pacific Ocean at 3 in the morning. Utter darkness. No moon to guide you. The stars are hidden behind clouds so dense, it feels as if the sky itself is pressing down upon the water with its weight. The air temperature is a mere 64 degrees Fahrenheit, yet the humidity is nearly 100%, turning every breath into a struggle against the invisible wall of moisture that hangs in the atmosphere. The wind whistles through the antennas, creating a sound reminiscent of a dying creature's wail, long, high-pitched, and piercing. Waves crash against the steel hull with the precision of a metronome, strike after strike, millions of strikes throughout the night, a relentless percussion of nature, a reminder that the ocean never sleeps, never tires, never forgives. And in this primordial darkness, in this void where nothing exists but water and sky stretching 360 degrees around, moves a Leviathan, a container ship. 400 meters of steel and aluminum, towering 30 stories high, loaded with 20,000 metal boxes, each the size of a truck. The ship breathes. Turbines in its belly inhale air and exhale exhaust with a rhythm you can feel in your bones even from a kilometer away. A propeller, 10 meters in diameter, churns the water, leaving a trail of bioluminescent plankton, a ghostly green path through the dark. You stand on the deck of this giant, gazing at the containers stacked like children's blocks, higher than a 5-story building. Red, blue, green, yellow, they form a metallic labyrinth of streets and alleys between steel walls. And then, something strange happens. You hear a sound you shouldn't hear. A dull resonance of metal vibrating in the wind. A hollow sound. An echo within an empty cavity. And you realize these containers are empty. Not all of them, of course, but many. Perhaps a third, maybe half. Thousands of metal boxes, each weighing 2.5 tons, journeying across the ocean carrying nothing but air. This ship burns tons of fuel every hour. It battles waves and wind. Its crew of 23 works around the clock. All this to transport air from one port to another. It's absurd. It's madness. It's an economic catastrophe. And it's happening right now on hundreds of ships worldwide. Why? The answer I'm about to give you will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about global trade, logistics, and the very nature of the modern economy. Because empty containers crossing the ocean are not a mistake. They are not a planning failure. They are a symptom. A symptom of a profound imbalance in the global system of production and consumption. Let's start with the basics. What is a container? A metal box, standardized, 20 feet long, 6 feet wide, 8 feet high, or 40 feet long for larger loads. It's the most important object in the modern economy that most people never think about. Before the invention of the container in 1956, shipping was a nightmare. Every crate, every barrel, every sack had to be loaded by hand. Dock workers toiled for days to unload a single ship. Theft was rampant. Cargo damage was inevitable. The cost of transportation was so high that most goods were produced and consumed locally. Global trade existed, but only for expensive luxury items or critically important raw materials. Then came Malcolm McLean, an American entrepreneur and trucking magnate. He looked at the chaos of the ports and thought there must be a better way. His idea was revolutionary in its simplicity. Standardize the packaging of cargo. Create metal boxes of a uniform size that could be loaded onto a ship by crane. That could then be removed by the same crane and placed onto a truck or rail car. The cargo stays in the container from producer to consumer. No one touches the contents. No theft, no damage. The speed of loading increases tenfold. The first container ship, ingeniously transformed from a tanker, set sail from Newark to Houston on April 26, 1956. Aboard were 58 containers, and what usually took a week to unload was accomplished in just 8 hours. The efficiency was so striking that within a decade, the entire industry had transformed. By 1970, containers had become the standard. By 1980, the old methods of cargo handling had nearly vanished. Today, 90% of global goods are transported in containers. Annually, around 700 million containers traverse the oceans. They are the backbone of the global economy. Without containers, there would be no affordable electronics, clothing, or furniture. Global supply chains would not exist. Companies couldn't manufacture in China, sell in America, and turn a profit. The world would be a completely different place. And here's where the problem begins. Containers don't move evenly across the globe. They flow in one direction much more than the other. From Asia to America and Europe, there's a torrent of goods. Electronics, clothing, toys, furniture, plastic products, all churned out by factories in China, Vietnam, Bangladesh. The return journey to Asia is a mere trickle. A bit of agricultural produce, some raw materials, a smattering of scrap paper and metal for recycling. But the volume is incomparable. For every 10 containers heading west, only 3 or 4 make the return trip east. This creates a mathematical conundrum that defies elegant solutions. Containers pile up at destination ports. Thousands of empty metal boxes stack up at terminals, occupying space and creating a logistical nightmare. They need to be sent back to Asia, where factories require them to ship the next batch of goods. So, container ships load up with empty containers and ferry them back across the Pacific or Atlantic. Thousands of tons of steel carrying nothing. It sounds insane. Why not just leave the surplus containers in America and manufacture new ones in Asia? The answer lies in economics. Producing a new container costs about $3,000. Shipping an empty container back to Asia costs around $500 if the ship is already heading that way. The math is straightforward. It's cheaper to transport an empty container than to make a new one. But that's just the surface layer of the problem. The reality is far more complex and much darker. The owners of the containers are not the owners of the ships. The container ship belongs to a shipping company. The containers belong to leasing companies or the shippers themselves. This division of ownership creates a conflict of interest. The shipping company earns money by transporting cargo, whether the containers are full or empty. Their payment depends on the number of containers on board. The leasing company profits by renting out containers. The more containers in circulation, the greater the profit. They benefit from having an excess of containers because it ensures that clients always find an available container and pay for the rental. This system creates a vicious cycle: an excess of containers at destination ports, a shortage at departure ports, constant movement of empty boxes back and forth across the oceans, and no one is accountable for the efficiency of the system as a whole because each player optimizes only their part. This is known as the tragedy of the commons. When a resource is used by many but owned by none, it is used inefficiently. The ocean is a common resource. The atmosphere is a common resource. The fuel burned to transport empty containers pollutes the air we all breathe. But the cost of this pollution is borne by no one in particular. It is spread across all of humanity. Let's delve into the true cost of transporting an empty container across the Pacific Ocean. The distance from Shanghai to Los Angeles is about 11,000 kilometers. A modern container ship consumes around 250 tons of heavy fuel oil per day. This heavy fuel oil is the dirtiest fuel imaginable. It's the residue left after refining crude oil, thick as tar and filled with sulfur and heavy metals. When burned, it releases massive amounts of sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter. One study found that the 16 largest ships in the world emit as much sulfur pollution as all the cars on the planet combined. 16 ships versus a billion cars. A Pacific crossing takes roughly 14 days. Multiply 250 tons by 14 days, and you get 3,500 tons of fuel for a single voyage. Suppose the ship carries 20,000 containers, 7,000 of which are empty. This means 35% of the fuel is burned to transport air. That's 1,225 tons of heavy fuel oil, the weight of 2 Boeing 747s. This fuel transforms into carbon dioxide, releasing about 3,800 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere from transporting empty containers on one ship per trip. How many such trips occur annually? Thousands. The total carbon dioxide emissions from transporting empty containers amount to millions of tons each year. This is a contribution to global warming that could be avoided if the system were balanced. But it's not balanced. It can't be balanced as long as there's a fundamental asymmetry between production and consumption. The West consumes more than it produces. Asia produces more than it consumes. This asymmetry is embedded in the global economic structure. An American company designs a product in California and sends the design to a factory in China. The factory produces 1 million units using Chinese raw materials, Chinese energy, and Chinese labor. The products are loaded into containers and shipped to America, sold to American consumers. Profits return to America. China gets workers' wages and some factory profit, but most of the added value stays in the West. The containers remain in the West, empty. This isn't a bug of the system. It's a feature. The global economy is built on exploiting labor cost differences between regions. A Chinese worker earns 10 times less than an American. Manufacturing in China is cheap, even when factoring in transportation. Companies make enormous profits from this disparity. Consumers get cheap goods. Everyone's happy. Except the planet. Except the Chinese workers breathing polluted air. Except the ocean filling with plastic waste. Except the atmosphere saturated with carbon dioxide. But these costs are invisible. They don't factor into the price tag on a store shelf. When you buy a $10 t-shirt, you don't see the cost of the fuel burned to deliver it. You don't see the carbon dioxide now in the atmosphere. You don't see the empty container sailing back to Asia. The price you pay is just a fraction of the real cost. The rest is paid by the future. Now, let's consider the issue from another perspective, the ship's perspective. A container ship is a living entity, metaphorically speaking. It has needs. It must be balanced. Cargo must be evenly distributed, or the ship could capsize. Empty containers weigh 2.5 tons. Full ones can weigh up to 30 tons. That's a massive difference. If all the heavy containers are at the bow and all the light ones at the stern, the ship will lose its trim. The bow will dip underwater. The stern will rise. The propeller might come out of the water, losing traction. The ship would become unmanageable. So empty containers are used as ballast. They're strategically placed to balance the weight of the full containers. They don't just take up space. They're essential for the ship's safety. It's another layer of absurdity in the situation. Empty containers serve a purpose, but that purpose exists only because the system is inefficient. If the flow of goods were balanced, there would be no need for empty containers as ballast. The ship could carry valuable cargo in both directions. Now, imagine a storm. The Pacific Ocean during the winter months is one of the most treacherous regions for seafaring on the planet. Waves can reach heights of 50 feet. Winds howl at 75 miles per hour. The ship fights for survival. Each wave is a blow trying to capsize the vessel, tear apart the metal, and toss containers into the ocean. And in the midst of this nightmare, as the crew clings to the rails and the ship lists at 30 degrees, the captain knows that a third of the cargo on board is just air. Thousands of tons of steel groan under the strain, protecting nothing. Every year, thousands of containers fall overboard. The exact number is unknown because not all losses are recorded. Estimates range from 1 to 10,000 containers annually. They are scattered across the ocean floor from the Arctic to the Antarctic. The plastic inside decomposes over decades or centuries. Chemicals seep into the water. Metal rusts, slowly poisoning the local ecosystem. This is also part of the true cost of global trade. A cost that no one pays directly. It's spread across the planet, across time, across future generations. Now let's talk about the human side, the crews of container ships. On average, 23 people. They spend months at sea, 4-hour shifts around the clock. The work is monotonous and dangerous at the same time. Most of the time, nothing happens. The ship follows its course, the autopilot in control. But at any moment, a crisis can occur. A storm, an engine failure, a fire, a collision. And then, these 23 people are all that stand between a $200 million ship and disaster. They know what they're carrying. Full containers, empty containers. To them, it's just cargo. Their job is to deliver it from point A to point B safely and on time. They don't think about the economic absurdity of the system. They just do their job. Get up when the alarm rings, check the instruments, watch the sea, eat, sleep, repeat, day after day. This is the life of a modern sailor, isolated from the world, communication with family limited to rare satellite calls. Most of the time, they're alone with their thoughts, the ocean, and the constant roar of the engine. The human element is easy to forget when talking about global trade. We see products on store shelves. We don't see the people who delivered them. We don't think about the Filipino sailor who spent 9 months away from his family so that t-shirt or phone could be available to us. Global trade runs on the backs of millions of invisible workers. Sailors, dock workers, truck drivers, warehouse employees. They don't earn high wages. Their work is considered low-skilled, though it requires immense experience and skill. They are cogs in a giant machine that exploits them, just as it exploits the planet. Now let's look at the bigger picture. The very idea of globalization. For the past 50 years, we've been told that globalization is a boon, that free trade enriches everyone, that specialization and the division of labor between countries create efficiency. And in some ways, that's true. Globalization has lifted billions out of poverty. It has made goods cheaper and more accessible. It has spread technology and knowledge across the globe. But every coin has another side. Globalization has also spawned a monstrous dependency. When the COVID-19 pandemic struck in 2020, global supply chains crumbled. Factories in China shut down. Containers were stranded in ports. Goods weren't delivered. Western countries suddenly realized they weren't producing anything critically important on their own. Medical masks were made in China, drug components in India, microchips in Taiwan. If supplies are disrupted, people die, literally. Hospitals were left without protective equipment. Factories couldn't produce ventilators. All of this happened because, in the relentless pursuit of efficiency and profit, companies outsourced production to the far ends of the earth. And now, as the system faltered, it became clear there were no backup plans, no local manufacturing to fill the gaps, no stockpiles, because the system operates on a just-in-time basis, minimizing storage costs. It's a fragile system. Optimized for normal conditions, catastrophically vulnerable in a crisis, and empty containers drifting across oceans are a symptom of this fragility, a visible testament that the system only works in one direction, that the balance is broken. Were there attempts to solve the problem of empty containers? Of course. Smart people see the problem. They propose solutions. Some suggested creating a global container pool, a unified system where all containers belong to a single organization and are distributed efficiently. A logical idea. Centralized planning could optimize flows, send containers where they're needed, avoiding empty trips. But implementation failed because shipping companies are competitors. They don't want to share information about their routes, cargoes, clients. These are trade secrets. Entrusting containers to a single organization means losing control. And control is power. Power is profit. So the idea died before it began. Others proposed foldable containers. Containers that could collapse when empty, reducing their volume by 4 times. One ship could carry 4 times more empty containers in the same space. Prototypes were created. They worked. But it turned out the folding mechanism adds weight and cost. A foldable container weighs 20% more than a regular one and costs twice as much. The folding and unfolding process requires time and special equipment. Ports didn't want to invest in new infrastructure. Shipping companies didn't want to pay more for containers. Container manufacturers didn't want to change production lines. Everyone waited for someone else to make the first move. No one did. A third group suggested incentivizing reverse cargo flows, subsidies for companies exporting from America and Europe to Asia, reduced rates for eastbound shipping. The idea was to artificially balance trade if a natural balance was impossible. Some programs were launched. Results were minimal. Because the fundamental problem wasn't solved, America and Europe consume more than they produce. It's a structural deficit. It's not a logistics issue. It's an economic model issue. As long as Western countries live on credit, buying more than they sell, the imbalance will persist, and empty containers will keep floating back. So all attempts to solve the problem failed, not because the solutions are technically impossible, but because they're economically and politically unfeasible. Too many players with conflicting interests. Too much inertia in the existing system. Too few incentives for change. Because for each individual player, the system works well enough. Shipping companies make money transporting empty containers. Not big money, but better than sailing half empty. Leasing companies profit from rentals. The more containers in circulation, the better for them. Manufacturers in Asia get orders. Consumers in the West get cheap goods. Everyone seems content. The issue is that the planet foots the bill for this merriment. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere doesn't just vanish, it accumulates. Average temperatures rise. Glaciers melt. Sea levels climb. Weather patterns grow more extreme, and we all pay the price. Not with money, not yet anyway, but with air quality, climate stability, the future of our children. This is a cost not reflected in any company's balance sheet, yet it's real, and it's escalating. Let's trace the journey of a single empty container from start to finish. This container is born in a factory in China. China produces 90% of the world's containers. Steel is cut, pressed, welded. The floor is plywood. Doors have rubber seals. The paint is typically blue, red, or green, bright colors for easy identification. The owner's code is stenciled on the side, 4 letters and 7 numbers, a unique identifier. The entire process takes a few hours. Production costs around $2,000. The container is loaded onto a truck. It heads to the port. There, it's filled with electronics, smartphones, laptops, tablets, all packed in boxes stacked on pallets. The container is sealed. A crane lifts it onto a ship. 23 days at sea. The Pacific Ocean, storms and calm. The container sways, vibrates, creaks. Inside, the electronics are cushioned by packaging. Temperatures fluctuate. Humidity is high. But the goods will survive. Arrival in Los Angeles. A crane lifts the container off the ship. Places it on a truck. The truck drives to an Amazon warehouse inland. There, the container is opened. The goods are unloaded. Boxes are scanned and shelved. The container is now empty. The truck takes it back to the port, but not immediately. Because the return trip doesn't pay as well as the outbound, the driver waits for an order. Maybe someone will want to use the container to ship something back to China. A week passes. No orders come. The container sits at the terminal among thousands of its empty siblings. It takes up space. The terminal pays for land. Every square meter costs money. Empty containers are a loss of space. The terminal wants to get rid of them. The shipping company gets the message. 5,000 empty containers in Los Angeles. A shortage in Shanghai. Send them back. A ship is loaded. 7,000 empty containers, plus 3,000 full ones with American grain and scrap metal, but mostly empty. 23 days back. The ocean is indifferent. It doesn't care that the container is empty. It crashes waves with the same force. Arrival in Shanghai. The container is unloaded. A truck takes it to a factory. There, it's loaded again. Electronics. The cycle repeats. This container will make 20 to 30 such cycles in its lifetime. 10 to 15 years of service. Most of the time, it's full, but every other trip, it's empty or nearly so. That's its fate, the fate of millions of containers. Born in China. To die somewhere in a scrapyard when corrosion and metal fatigue render it unsafe. Between birth and death, it travels the world, carrying goods that will change lives or merely end up in a landfill within a year. And half the time, it carries nothing but air. There's something tragic in this tale. A container is a tool. It wants to work, if desire can be attributed to a hunk of metal. Its purpose is to carry cargo. But the system forces it to travel empty. It's not its choice. It's not the result of some malevolent will. It's simply the outcome of millions of small decisions made by millions of people, each optimizing their small part without seeing the whole. And collectively, these decisions create absurdity. A global system that works against its own efficiency, that squanders scarce resources, that pollutes a planet gasping for breath. Let's return to the ship in the vast ocean, to that container vessel where our journey began. It's 3 a.m. The darkness is complete. The ship slices through the waves. 7,000 empty containers on board. The crew sleeps, save for those on watch. In his cabin, the captain struggles to find sleep, but the ocean is too loud, the waves too fierce. The ship tilts and groans. His thoughts drift to home, to the wife and children he hasn't seen in 4 months. 2 more months until his contract ends. 2 more months of this gray ocean, gray skies, gray monotony. He knows what he's carrying. Empty containers eastward, full ones westward. He's been doing this for 20 years. He's witnessed the changes. More containers, bigger ships, tighter schedules, less time in ports. The system is accelerating. It demands more, gives less. He's tired. But work is work. There's a family to feed, a mortgage to pay, children's education to fund. So he carries on, year after year, voyage after voyage, hauling empty containers across the ocean because someone has to. Below in the engine room, the mechanic checks the gauges, oil temperature, fuel pressure, bearing vibrations. Everything's normal. The engine runs like clockwork, a giant diesel the height of a 3-story building, 100,000 horsepower. It consumes 250 tons of fuel a day, turning it into motion, heat, and exhaust. The mechanic doesn't think about ecology. His job is to keep the engine running. If it stops, the ship is helpless. The ocean doesn't forgive helplessness. He's Filipino, sends most of his salary home. They've built a new house. Bought a tractor. The kids attend a good school. His sacrifice is worth it. But sometimes, at night, as the engine roars and the ship sways, he wonders, was it worth it? Years spent away from family, missed birthdays, holidays, important moments. The money he sends doesn't make up for his absence. The children grow up not knowing their father. His wife ages alone. But there's no alternative, no jobs in the village. The Philippine economy relies on the money sailors send home. On the bridge, the watch officer peers into the darkness. The radar shows emptiness. The ship's navigation lights reflect on the water. Red on the right, green on the left, white on the mast. The autopilot holds the course. The officer checks the position every 15 minutes, adjusts if necessary. Mostly it's not necessary. The system works. The ship knows where to go. The officer is there in case something goes wrong, but usually nothing does. He thinks about the containers below. Empty containers. He knows it's wasteful. He studied maritime logistics at the academy. He understands the economy. But he also understands that the system is bigger than any individual. He can't change it. He can only play his part. Guide the ship from A to B, safely and on time. The rest is not his concern. It's rationalization, a way to cope with cognitive dissonance. Everyone on the ship does it. They know the system is flawed, but they don't feel responsible because they're just cogs. Decisions are made far away. The ocean continues its relentless assault. The ship presses on. The containers sway and creak. The empty ones resonate differently than the full ones. A trained ear can tell the difference. The metallic hum of emptiness against the muffled sound of cargo. A symphony of imbalance played by wind and waves on steel drums. Night slowly gives way to the pre-dawn twilight. The sky in the east turns gray, then pink, then golden. The sun rises from the ocean, a fiery orb promising a new day. The watch changes. Tired hands are replaced by rested ones, but the job remains the same. Hold the course, monitor the engine, check the cargo. Over and over, day after day. Until the voyage ends. 9 more days to Shanghai. 9 days of battling an ocean that doesn't want them there, that tolerates their presence, but is always ready to remind them who's in charge. One big storm, one rogue wave, one critical failure, and the ship could become a grave. The crew knows this, lives with this knowledge. Meanwhile, in Shanghai, a factory is churning out new containers. Steel is being sliced, metal is bending, sparks fly. Workers, clad in protective masks and gloves, perform repetitive motions, thousands of times a day. Each container is a mirror of the last. Standardization is the key. Every container must fit on any ship, truck, or train. It must stack seamlessly with any other container. Interchangeability is what keeps the system running, but it also renders the system soulless. The factory workers don't ponder the fate of the containers they craft. They're unaware that half the time, these containers will travel empty. They don't know of the oceans they'll cross, the storms they'll weather, or the cargo they'll carry. For the workers, it's just a job. 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. The pay is modest but steady, enough to live on, but not enough to thrive. They're cogs in a machine that exploits their labor for minimal pay. This is the irony of the global system. The people who make the goods can't afford to buy them. The people who buy the goods don't make them. Production and consumption are divided by geography and economy. And in between, oceans are crossed by container ships hauling full loads westward and empty ones eastward. An endless cycle, an endless imbalance, an endless price paid by the planet. Now imagine standing on a shoreline, somewhere on the west coast of America, perhaps California. The beach is sandy and wide. Waves roll in gently. The day is clear. The sky is blue. It seems peaceful. But if you look to the horizon, you'll see them. Ships. Dozens of them anchored, waiting for permission to enter the port. Because the ports are overwhelmed. Cranes work around the clock but can't keep up. Containers arrive faster than they can be unloaded. The system is running at its limit. One delay triggers a cascade of issues. A ship arrives late at port. Containers aren't unloaded on time. Trucks wait. Warehouses overflow. The next ship can't dock. The queue grows. It's a fragile system, optimized for maximum efficiency under ideal conditions. But conditions are rarely ideal. A storm delays a ship. A dockworker strike halts a port. A pandemic disrupts the entire chain. And the system falters. Goods aren't delivered. Store shelves empty. Prices rise. People panic. Politicians point fingers. But no one blames the system. Because the system is all we know. We can't envision an alternative. Global trade seems as natural and inevitable as gravity or weather. We've forgotten it's a choice, that we built this system, and we can build another, but it requires collective will, a willingness to pay more for goods made closer to home, a willingness to accept less variety and availability, a willingness to change our way of life. And most people aren't ready. They want cheap goods and don't want to know the cost. They want to believe their consumer choices have no consequences, that they're not responsible for ship emissions, factory working conditions, or plastic in the oceans. It's a convenient lie, a lie that allows the system to keep running, and the ship in the ocean continues its journey. It knows nothing of philosophical debates. It's just a machine performing a function, its existence justified by utility. It carries cargo, therefore it is needed. Never mind that a third of the cargo is air. The math is cold. It's cheaper to transport an empty container than to make a new one. Therefore, transport it. The logic is flawless in its narrowness. It doesn't account for externalities. It doesn't consider long-term consequences. It doesn't consider that what's cheaper now might be costlier later. Every purchase we make is a vote for the system that produced it, for the working conditions in the factory, for the emissions from the ship that delivered the goods, for the empty container sailing back. We vote with our wallets, and most of us vote for the status quo, for cheapness over ethics, for convenience over sustainability, for today over tomorrow. This isn't an accusation, it's an observation. People make rational choices within a system that offers them limited options. When wages are low and expenses high, cheap goods aren't a luxury, they're a necessity. The problem isn't individual choice, it's the structure that makes destructive choices the most accessible. Changing the system requires collective action, regulation, carbon taxes, labor standards, trade agreements that include environmental and social criteria. These are political decisions. They require political will, which is currently lacking. Because politicians respond to short-term pressures. Elections in 2-4 years. Inflation now. Unemployment now. Climate change in 50 years. It's easy to postpone what isn't urgent, but the planet is burning. Slowly. Imperceptibly to those who refuse to see. Yet the indicators are clear. Temperatures are rising. Glaciers are melting. Species are vanishing. Oceans are acidifying. These aren't predictions. This is measurable reality. And the empty containers crossing the oceans are a small part of the problem. A tiny part, but symbolic, because they show that we know the system is broken, and we continue to support it. Because the alternative is frightening. The alternative requires change, and humans are creatures of habit. We cling to the familiar, even when the familiar is slowly killing us. A ship departs from Shanghai. A new voyage, a new cargo, the same job. The ocean remains unchanged, indifferent, eternal. It has been here for billions of years. It will be here for billions more after humanity is gone. To the ocean, ships are a fleeting irritation, bubbles on the surface. They will come and go. The ocean will remain. This perspective is both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it reminds us that we are not as important as we think. The planet will survive without us. Life will find a way. Terrifying because it shows that our actions have consequences that will outlive us. The plastic we discard will remain for centuries. The carbon we emit will alter the climate for millennia. The species we drive to extinction will never return. We leave a mark, and it will be an ugly mark. Future generations, if they exist, will look back at our time with horror or bewilderment. How could we know and not act? How could we see the problem and continue to exacerbate it? They will have no answers, because we have none now. We just carry on, day by day, buying things, working jobs, living lives. And somewhere in the ocean, ships carry empty containers. So here we are, at the end of this journey. We've traced the empty container from the factory across the ocean back to the factory. We've seen the system that makes this necessary, the economy that makes it profitable, the people who make it possible. And the question remains, what will we do about it? This isn't a rhetorical question. It's a real question demanding a real answer. Because the system won't change itself. Ships won't stop carrying empty containers as long as it's profitable. Companies won't stop exploiting cheap labor as long as consumers buy the results. Politicians won't take tough measures until voters demand it. Change must come from us, from ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Buying less, buying locally when possible, demanding transparency from companies, voting for politicians who take climate seriously. These are small actions. They won't solve the problem overnight, but they are a beginning, a drop in the ocean, yet the ocean is made up of drops. Imagine what would happen if 1 million people decided to reduce their consumption of imported goods by 10%. That's 100,000 fewer containers a year. Thousands of tons of carbon not released into the atmosphere. A small change multiplied by 1 million becomes significant. History shows us that societies can change radically when enough people decide the old way no longer works. Slavery was an economic necessity until it became a moral impossibility. Child labor was the norm until it became a crime. Smoking on airplanes was commonplace until it became unthinkable. Each of these changes seemed impossible until they happened. And when they did, people looked back in astonishment, wondering how they ever accepted the old system. Perhaps one day future generations will look back at our time, at the empty containers crossing oceans, at a global trade system built on cheap fuel and cheap labor. And they'll wonder how we could. And perhaps someone will answer. They saw. Some of them. They knew the system was broken, but change was hard, and they were tired, and the problem was vast. So they carried on, hoping someone else would solve it. But the bill always comes due. Nature keeps its own accounts. Carbon in the atmosphere doesn't vanish on a whim. Extinct species don't return. Melted glaciers don't refreeze. Physics doesn't forgive. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't grant extensions. It simply is. Cold, unyielding, just in its indifference. So the question is for you. Yes, you. What will you do? Will you continue as before? Buy the next cheap item without a thought of where it came from? Or will you pause for a moment? Consider the ship on the ocean, the empty containers, the system that transports air across half the planet. And if you truly think about all this, perhaps something will shift inside you. We must change. The question isn't if, it's when and how. Will we change by choice now while we still have some control? Or will we change out of necessity later when nature forces our hand? The first path is difficult. It demands sacrifices. The second path is catastrophic. Nature doesn't care about our comfort. When systems collapse, they do so chaotically. We have an advantage. We know what's happening. We have science, data, history. We can see the cliff ahead. We still have time to slow down. Not much time, but some. Will we use it? It's a choice we make every day, collectively, individually. And the ships will continue to carry empty containers until we decide otherwise, until we say enough. The choice is yours. It always has been. And somewhere right now, at this very moment, a ship cuts through the waves of the Pacific Ocean. On board, 7,000 empty containers. The crew goes about their work. The ocean breathes. The planet spins. And everything continues. Until we decide that it must change. The only question is, will we decide in time?